in which an affair unfolds, and we see the damage wrought upon the scorned. Chapter 26. Externally, Alexei Alexandrovich's relations with his wife remained the same as before. The only difference was that he was even busier than before. As in previous years, with the coming of spring he went to a spa abroad to restore his health, upset each year by his strenuous winter labors. Returning in July, as usual, he at once sat down with increasing energy to his customary work. And, as usual, his wife moved to the country house while he stayed in Petersburg. Since the time of that conversation after the evening at Princess Tverskoy's, he had never spoken to Anna of his suspicions and jealousy, and his usual mocking tone could not have been better for his present relations with his wife. He was somewhat colder towards her. It was merely as if he were slightly displeased with her for that first night's conversation which he had fended off. There was a tinge of vexation in his relations with her, nothing more. "You did not wish to have a talk with me," he seemed to be saying, mentally addressing her. "So much the worse for you. Now you'll ask me, and I won't talk. So much the worse for you," he said mentally, like a man who, after a vain attempt to put out a fire, gets angry at his vain efforts and says, "Serves you right. So for that you can just burn down." He who was so intelligent and subtle in official business did not understand all the madness of such an attitude towards his wife. He did not understand it because it was too dreadful for him to recognize his real position, and in his soul he closed, locked, and sealed the drawer in which he kept his feelings for his family, that is, his wife and son. He who had been an attentive father had become especially cold towards his son since the end of that winter, and took the same bantering attitude towards his son as towards his wife. "Ah, young man," was the way he addressed him. Alexei Alexandrovich thought and said that he had never had so much official business in any other year as he had that year. But he did not realize that he had invented things for himself to do that year, that this was one way of not opening the drawer where his feelings for his wife and family and his thoughts about them lay, becoming more dreadful the longer they lay there. If anyone had had the right to ask Alexei Alexandrovich what he thought about his wife's behavior, the mild, placid Alexandrovich would have made no reply, but would have become very angry with the man who had asked him about it. And that was why there was something proud and stern in the expression of Alexei Alexandrovich's face when he was asked about his wife's health. He did not want to think anything about his wife's behavior and feelings, and in fact, did not think anything about them. Alexei Alexandrovich's permanent country house was in Peterhof, and Countess Lydia Ivanovna usually spent the summers there too, in the neighborhood and in constant contact with Anna. This year, Countess Lydia Ivanovna refused to live in Peterhof, never once visited Anna Arkadyevna, and hinted to Alexei Alexandrovich at the awkwardness of Anna's closeness to Betsy and Vronsky. Alexei Alexandrovich sternly interrupted her, expressing the thought that his wife was above suspicion, and after that he began to avoid Countess Lydia Ivanovna. He did not want to see, and did not see, that in society many were already looking askance at his wife. He did not want to understand, and did not understand, why his wife insisted especially on moving to Zarsko, where Betsy lived, which was not far from the camp of Vronsky's regiment. He did not allow himself to think of it, and did not think of it, but nevertheless, in the depths of his soul, without ever saying it to himself, and having not only no proofs of it, but even no suspicions, he knew without doubt that he was a deceived husband, and it made him deeply unhappy. How many times during his 8 years of happy life with his wife, looking at other people's unfaithful wives and deceived husbands, had Alexey Alexandrovitch said to himself, "How can one let it come to that? How can one not undo this ugly situation?" But now, when the disaster had fallen on his head, he not only did not think of how to undo the situation, but did not want to know about it at all, did not want to know precisely because it was too terrible, too unnatural. Since his return from abroad, Alexey Alexandrovitch had been to the country house twice. Once he had dinner. The other time he spent the evening with guests, but neither time did he spend the night, as he had usually done in previous years. The day of the races was a very busy day for Alexey Alexandrovitch, but, having made a schedule for himself that morning, he decided that immediately after an early dinner he would go to see his wife at their country house, and from there to the races, which the whole court would attend, and which he too had to attend. He would visit his wife because he had decided to see her once a week for propriety's sake. Besides, according to the established rule, that day being the 15th, he had to give her money for her expenses. With his customary control over his mind, having pondered all this about his wife, he did not allow his thoughts to go further into what concerned her. That morning, Alexey Alexandrovitch was very busy. The day before, Countess Lydia Ivanovna had sent him a booklet by a famous traveler to China, then in Petersburg, with a letter asking him to receive the traveler himself, a very interesting and necessary man in many regards. Alexey Alexandrovitch had not finished the booklet the night before, and so he finished it in the morning. Then petitioners came, reports began, receptions, appointments, dismissals, distributions of awards, pensions, salaries, correspondence, all that everyday business, as Alexey Alexandrovitch called it, which took up so much time. Then there were personal matters, visits from his doctor and his office manager. The office manager did not take much time. He merely handed Alexey Alexandrovitch the money he needed and gave a brief report on the state of his affairs, which was not entirely good, because it so happened that, having gone out frequently that year, they had spent more, and there was a deficit. But the doctor, a famous Petersburg doctor who was on friendly terms with Alexey Alexandrovitch, took much time. Alexey Alexandrovitch did not expect him that day, and was surprised by his arrival, and still more by the fact that the doctor questioned him very attentively about his condition, sounded his chest, tapped and palpated his liver. Alexey Alexandrovitch did not know that his friend Lydia Ivanovna, noticing that his health was not good that year, had asked the doctor to go to examine the patient. "Do it for me," she had said to him. "I shall do it for Russia, Countess," the doctor had replied. "A priceless man," Countess Lydia Ivanovna had said. The doctor remained very displeased with Alexey Alexandrovitch. He found his liver considerably enlarged, his appetite insufficient, and the waters of no effect. He prescribed as much physical movement and as little mental strain as possible, and above all, no sort of distress. That is, the very thing which for Alexey Alexandrovitch was as impossible as not to breathe, and he went off, leaving Alexey Alexandrovitch with the unpleasant awareness that something was wrong with him, and that it could not be put right. On the porch, as he was leaving, the doctor ran into Slyudin, Alexey Alexandrovitch's office manager, whom he knew well. They had been at the university together, and though they saw each other rarely, respected each other and were good friends, and therefore the doctor would not have given anyone so frank an opinion of the patient as he gave to Slyudin. I'm so glad you visited him, said Sluden. He's unwell, and I think... Well, what is it? Here's what, said the doctor, waving over Sluden's head for his coachman to drive up. Here's what, he said, taking a finger of his kid glove in his white hands and stretching it. If a string isn't tight, and you try to break it, it's very hard to do. But tighten it to the utmost, and put just the weight of your finger on it, and it will break. And he, with his assiduousness, his conscientiousness about his work, is tightened to the utmost degree. And there is external pressure, and a heavy one, the doctor concluded, raising his eyebrows significantly. Will you be at the races? He added, going down to the waiting carriage. Yes, naturally. It takes a lot of time, the doctor replied to some remark of Sluden's that he had not quite heard. After the doctor, who had taken so much time, came the famous traveler, and Alexey Alexandrovitch, using the just-read booklet and the previous knowledge of the subject, struck the traveler with the depth of his grasp and the breadth of his enlightened outlook. Along with the traveler, the arrival of a provincial marshal was announced, who had come to Petersburg and with whom he had to talk. After his departure, he needed to finish the everyday work with his office manager and also go to see a very significant person on some serious and important business. Alexey Alexandrovitch just managed to get back by 5 o'clock. His dinner time, and having dined with his office manager, invited him to come along to his country house in the races. Without realizing it, Alexey Alexandrovitch now sought occasions for having a third person present at his meetings with his wife. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.